One of the most exhausting parts of this story comes at the very beginning, when it says Jacob had 2 wives and 2 maids, which if you do the math is 4 wives. And every man in the room says, oh, he was alone for the first time. But it wasn't just that he needed quiet. It wasn't that Jacob was taking a break from responsibility. Jacob had amassed responsibility. What Jacob was looking for was blessing. He was seeking a blessing. Jacob wanted a blessing. Don't we all? Jacob needed a blessing, at least in his mind, so desperately that he sought after a blessing. He went out of his way to try to create a moment of blessedness. His intentional decisions leave him alone in the night, leaving him to wrestle with this stranger. Is it a vision? Is it a dream? Is it his brother sneaking into his camp? Is it an angel? Is it God? Depending on which expert you read, you'll get any of these. But why is he so desperate for a blessing? To answer that, we really have to go back. We have to rewind to the beginning of the story with 2 brothers who created such a rough pregnancy for their mother that she swore they were fighting in the womb. We hear the legends of one coming out, grabbing onto the other's ankle, racing from the very beginning, competing with each other. Parents may not have been the best examples for these young competitive men. As they grew up, the parents tended to play favorites. Esau, dad's favorite. Jacob, mom's favorite. And along the way, his mother decides, Jacob, you're the one who should be the lead of the family going forward. You're the one I think God has truly blessed to take us the next step of the journey. Dad, not so much, really favored the older by a whiff of the ankle, Esau. Along the way, we get these biblical stories, these epic tales of Jacob and Esau fighting over a blessing. We get Esau coming in from the field famished, almost as if he could die. Yes, young adults were overly dramatic then too. Jacob had a stew on that smelled so good, and Esau said, I would do anything for that. I could die without it. And again, I think they sound like middle schoolers, but you take it for whatever you will. And Jacob makes the deal. Fine, you give me your blessing as firstborn, and I'll give you the stew, mister, I'm about to die. He makes the deal. He eats the stew. It's good stew. Years later, their dad is blind, old, and not sure how much longer he has to live, and it's time to give the family blessing, the formal blessing to the oldest. And at this point, Esau takes the invitation from his father to go out and get food, to make it, to hunt for it and bring it back, to make the savory food he likes. Well, didn't he already sell this blessing? Isn't he going to tell his dad, no, Dad, I sold that to Jacob for a bowl of stew years ago? Yeah, that story's not going to play well to Dad, right? So he just goes along with it. Anyway, Jacob took advantage of him. It wouldn't be fair. But Mom's listening. And even though women didn't hold as much power, she used what she had. She used the tools available to her. So she dresses up Jacob as Esau. She makes the food like her husband likes, sends it with Jacob, and assures him not to worry about any condemnation that will come from getting caught. Just go for it. She prepares him, coaches him, sends him in. Jacob receives the blessing. Esau comes back, goes to his dad for the blessing, and his dad says, sorry, I already gave the blessing away. Guess we got duped. Esau says, well, why don't you bless me too? Don't you have enough blessing? His dad goes, nope, apparently I can only bless one. Again, the great parenting continues. At this point, we're left with 2 brothers in conflict. Not just 2 brothers, we've got 2 parents who've taken stances against each other. This is a broken family. Jacob, if he was already the one who couldn't go out and hunt for the food, what makes us think he's going to defeat his hunter-gatherer brother now? So he takes off. He runs away. Along the journey, Jacob has his own coming of age. He meets this man who has 2 daughters, who needs some extra help with the flock. So Jacob helps out in exchange for the hand of the girl he loves. He is then the one that gets duped on his wedding day, finding out the future father-in-law has switched wives. So he works more years for the other one. The one who was the trickster with his brother all of a sudden finds himself being tricked. This family's got issues, right? And it's not just Jacob and Esau. It's everybody around them. It's a ripple effect within the community of the questionable ethics, the less than transparent communication. Jacob eventually takes his leave of his father-in-law, takes his wives, the livestock that he has earned along the way, his fair share, and breaks out on his own. And he does well. He's done well for himself. Despite the questionable background, despite the things he did when he was younger, he has done well. His mother's hopes for him have been proven correct. What life has given him seems to be a blessing, but Jacob in his heart feels inadequate. He doesn't feel good enough. It's ill-gotten blessing. It's not fairly gained blessing in his mind. And there's something still missing. Home. Home is still missing. There's still a brokenness within him that's not been healed. There's something that has been amiss, that's been off ever since he left. It's a reconciliation that is yet to happen, and he longs for it. He longs for it. And so he gets the 2 wives and the 2 maids and all the children, and he sets out back home to see Esau, who's also done well for himself. Esau has grown a large family as well. Esau has been very productive as a person, and Esau is coming to meet Jacob as he hears he's coming. And that's where our story today comes in. And that's where Jacob gets a little nervous. Esau is coming with all of his men, all of his helpers, all of his servants, 300 of them, big strapping guys that can all go out and hunt for the savory meat. All the inadequacies in Jacob, all the little brother stuff, all of the am I good enough comes back. And Jacob's having an identity crisis, a crisis of confidence. And so he sets out his wives and his maids and his children and all his flocks and his people and his wealth out as a game of show and tell for his brother. Look how good I did. Or maybe it's a first line of defense. Hard to say. Surely Esau wouldn't kill the women and children to get to him, right? Surely these protective soldiers Esau's bringing wouldn't fight through the women and children to kill Jacob. Everything Jacob's doing reeks of insecurity. And then he goes and lays down for the night. It did not matter what his mother did for him. It did not matter what life did for him. It didn't matter what God had blessed him for. He couldn't see it. He desperately wanted a blessing. And so in the night, he wrestles with himself, his own dark night of the soul, seeking a blessing. Seeking a blessing. Jacob wanted a blessing. Don't we all? Jacob wants to feel whole. Don't we all?
Jacob wanted a blessing. Jacob seeks to be whole. Jacob is at this point of desperation, feeling broken, his entire family affected by his inadequacy, and how much he longs for home, how much he longs for wholeness. He had wrestled almost all night with that unnamed stranger. And I think it was, from the sound of it, not just a spiritual wrestling, but there was a physical component because he comes out physically different. If you remember how this story goes on, just a verse or two, his hip is damaged, and he walks away with a limp that will stay with him. At the same time, Jacob received a new identity, a name change from that stranger, whoever that stranger was, whatever force that stranger was, unnamed stranger. The change of the name from Jacob to Israel, a change that would be not just a personal name change, a new identity, but a name that would define a people chosen by God from here on out. And yes, as this story goes on, just at verse 29, he receives a blessing too. You may recall, he asks the stranger for his name. The stranger doesn't give his name ever. But what the stranger does do, finally, after renaming Jacob and giving him this new identity, is to bless him. And yet, he's fearful. He's still anxious. He's trying and hoping to appease his brother with gifts galore. I see these women and children out front, and how can you not, as Esau, how can you not be disconcerted and moved by all of this, but also wondering, like, well, where's my brother? Why is he putting all these others in front of himself? Jacob is still trying to atone for the harm that he's done to his brother. And so, as our scripture reading ends, then we go on with Jacob trying to appease with all the rest and atone. His father's blessing, that original blessing, had strengthened him in one way, but at the same time, clearly, it alienated and harmed and hurt his brother Esau. The irony about this wrestling match is that after the wrestling and after receiving the stranger's blessing, Jacob lives on and thrives with new power, but also with new weakness because of this limp. And I wonder whether in that recognition, he gets a new sense of human connection. In restorative justice work, in human development, we call that empathy. Maybe he gets that he has harmed his brother and that it's his work now to do something to heal that. In all of this, there is a recognition that the blessing itself is not earned. Oh my gosh, with these two brothers, the blessing itself is not earned. But it's given by God, who is entwined in Jacob and Esau's family history. Jacob calls him a little bit earlier in verse 9 in this chapter 32. Jacob calls him God of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac, a personal God. This is a God who has shown Jacob in that same prayer in verse 10, steadfast love and faithfulness. And Jacob lifts that up as he prays. The struggle for us is accepting the blessing, claiming the gift of healing that's offered by a God we know as a God of steadfast love and faithfulness. That struggle was hard for Jacob too, although he has a new name, he has a new identity, he has a new way of life ahead of him. The struggle for us is living like we are blessed rather than staying stuck in shame, in the broken pieces of the past, in not doing the work and moving on to claim the blessing that's always there from God. The struggle for us is living like we are blessed even when we have the proverbial limp. One of the commentaries I read, Walter Brueggemann, said, Jacob lived, but he lived in a new way with new power and with new weakness. And then he faced his brother. I think this is a wonderful insight for all of us, because as we say in the restorative justice world, hurt people hurt people. And oftentimes we stop there and we work on the hurt and healing the hurt, but we forget that healing people heal people. I see it every day inside the prison. I see it every day in the community where I serve. That people who are coming to terms with the harm they've done in the past are finding ways to make amends, to atone. And that is accepting the blessing that God gives each of us. To return to Jacob and what comes next, I have to say there is a reunion after this confrontation of women and children and armies and servants, that the brothers reconcile, but there's a passage before they reconcile that continues the tension, because Jacob still can't bring himself just to say, I'm sorry. He just can't do it. And so what does he do? He basically, when Esau embraces him and forgives him and says, come on, let's be together, Jacob says, oh, I've got these things I have to do right now. I've got to go back to camp. There's cooking, there are flocks to tend. Sorry. And they don't sit down together. So there's this tension that keeps going, even though there's Jacob renamed in a new identity as Israel, Jacob receiving another blessing. Here's Esau offering deeper reconciliation, and Jacob can't get there yet. It's so human, right? So as we go on, we will find generations of mistrust. Interestingly, if you go on to chapter 36 of our book of Genesis, you will see 43 verses of Esau's genealogy. You'll see all the tribes and the generations. That is where our Muslim brothers and sisters connect their lineage. Christians to Jacob, Muslims to Esau. And then the text changes and we go on, we focus on Joseph and all as the story continues. But I think it's worth noting that Esau's honored. He's not wiped out of the narrative. This too is a demonstration to me of how healing people heal people. Because there were generations beyond putting together this scripture who wanted us to remember the dignity and the commitment of Esau. Reconciliation is seldom clear-cut, right? So it is true that we go on and we check in with the generations down from these two brothers in the books that follow the exile of God's people to Babylon, and then after they come back to Jerusalem. And we see that in the book of Nehemiah, for example, we see the descendants of Esau watching the rebuilding of Jerusalem with a fair amount of anxiety and tension. We see the descendants of Jacob doing the rebuilding Jerusalem in fear. Spears in one hand, tools in the other. Tools in one hand, spears in the other. Reconciliations are seldom as clear-cut as we would like them to be. So Jacob's encounter with God left him empowered, left him with a new identity, and left him crippled. Jacob's reconciliation with Esau included deception and excuses. I think the moral of the story, if there is one, is that Hurts don't go away completely by working on reconciliation, but we can make peace with our portion. And it's important for our healing to work on making that peace with our part of reconciliation. Hurts don't go away, right? But they can be translated into strengths, transformed into strength in the broken places. Hurts that we face can become tools for living like we are blessed, rather than tethering us to the past. I think it seldom comes from so quickly that we say, I'm healed, I'm letting go of my past, I'm never going to confront it again or run into it again. I don't think we're configured that way. I think the challenge for us as human beings, as God's people, is to keep doing the work authentically, to acknowledge the broken places, to work on the reconciliation, and to say and remember that there is blessing in this.
So we continue today to seek a blessing. We continue today wanting the blessing like Jacob. But invite you in your own life to think about where reconciliation still needs to take place. Where do issues of the past still keep you from claiming the blessedness that you hold? And not just individually, but we as community, where do we see it? Where do we still need to seek reconciliation? When you look within our national identity, at where hurts have happened and reconciliation has taken place, we can see how we have grown in so many ways, and we can still see where there is work to be done. We can see where intentionality has made a difference historically and where intentionality has failed. Think about historically just for a moment. Follow your history. The Civil War, coming out of slavery, and then into Reconstruction, right? Many, many years later, the United States finds itself in world war against people in Germany and Japan, right? Where have we created more forgiveness and reconciliation? Between people in Europe, who we fought against, and people of Asian descent? Or between white and black, North and South? Think about how recently the Vietnam War took place and the tensions, the dehumanizing cartoons that we put in newspapers, and how strong that relationship seems to be. Yet we still struggle with issues of racism and understanding historic hurts. There takes an intentionality. There takes a claiming of a blessing and a recognizing each other as blessed. And it takes continual work. Sometimes we see the fruits of it. Other times we see the need for more work. But it's a choice on our part. Not just to live in our insecurity, not just to live in our frustration about what isn't healed, or what brokenness still lingers, but to find beauty in the brokenness, strength in the broken places, and to claim the blessing that, as Nora said, comes from God already. To claim the blessing. What Jacob missed is that he was blessed. Jacob wanted a blessing, and he was blessed. We want a blessing, and we are blessed. Jacob wanted a blessing. Don't we all? He was blessed. Aren't we all?